Hey everybody, apologize for the late episode this week. I had a hard drive failure which caused the whole other version of this to die a sad death. So unfortunately this version not quite as good, but hopefully you enjoy it either way. Think about your favorite song. Think about the way it feels as though it's always existed, completely perfect and fully formed, just waiting for you to find it. We love to hear stories about catching lightning in a bottle. When we hear our favorite songs, we always think of them as fully formed and pulled from the cosmos in a single, effortless flash of inspiration. And sometimes, it actually happens that way. In 1968, John Fogerty sat down with a notebook just days after being discharged from the National Guard, started strumming an intro, and wrote the entirety of Proud Mary in an afternoon. In 1972, Dolly Parton sat down with her acoustic guitar to write a farewell to our longtime television partner and mentor, Porter Wagoner. Looking back at her paperwork and personal records, she realized she penned both Jolene and I Will Always Love You on the same day. REM's Losing My Religion came out of a 5-minute session where Peter Buck was just trying to learn how to play a mandolin he bought the day before. But the creative process can also be wrought with struggle. There are some songs that refuse to be caught. Masterpieces that don't arrive as lightning bolts, but as heavy, shifting stones that have to be dragged up a mountain over months, years, or even decades. These are the songs born of sheer will, where the writer has to completely rebuild the music, change the genre, or fill dozens of notebooks with discarded lyrics just to find a single, honest line. For example, Freddie Mercury started developing Bohemian Rhapsody in the late 1960s. His initial piano ideas became the labor of love that finally made its way onto the 1975 album A Night at the Opera. Bob Dylan revealed that Tangled Up in Blue took him 10 years to live and 2 years to write. As the opening track on 1975's Blood on the Tracks, Dylan continually reworked the lyrics and arrangement even after the album was released. The version released on his 1984 live album differs radically in structure and lyrics from earlier versions. And Don Henley said it took him 42 years to write Heart of the Matter. The track came together quickly when recording his third studio album, The End of the Innocents. But Henley stated that in his younger days, his attempts to explore this breakup would have likely led to a resentment-laden song. But 42 years of victories and defeats allowed him to see things clearly for the first time. Today, we're looking at a track that took years of agonizing effort to cross the finish line. A song born out of absolute, personal, professional, and spiritual collapse. A song that now has more than 300 different cover versions, but was initially rejected by Columbia Records. We're talking, of course, about Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. In 1977, Leonard Cohen's life was in disarray. He had just completed Death of a Ladies' Man, a disastrous, unhinged album engineered by a manic Phil Spector, who famously held a gun to Cohen's neck in the studio and locked him out of his own mixing sessions. The resulting tour was a chaotic nightmare. At the exact same time, his volatile decade-long relationship with Suzanne, the mother of his 2 children, was completely imploding. They were separating bidders, and Cohen felt entirely hollowed out, clinically depressed, and creatively spent. To survive, he retreated to Hydra, the sun-bleached Greek island where he had lived as a young poet in the 60s. He needed a clean slate, and he needed to wash the dirt off the Spector sessions and the wreckage of his family life. It was during this period of exile, right at the end of the 70s, that he met Dominique Isserman. Dominique was a brilliant French photographer, and their connection was an immediate, powerful artistic anchor. She became his muse, his lover, and a stabilizing force that helped pull him out of the dark. She was the one who would later sit in hotel rooms and watch him spend years obsessing over one single track. By 1979, his spirit somewhat restored, Cohen was ready to look forward. He had a fresh start, a new love, and a quiet determination to build something that was the exact opposite of the overproduced Phil Spector madness. And that is when the first abstract verses of Hallelujah began to leak into his notebooks. The writing process that followed was a brutal, slow-motion exercise in perfectionism. Cohen didn't just sit down and write a poem. He locked himself into hotel rooms, most notably at the Royalton Hotel in New York, and forced himself into a state of creative exile. He filled notebook after notebook, wrestling with the strict, unforgiving constraints of the song's structure. The track demanded a rigid AABB rhyming pattern, all leading down the narrow hallway to that one-word refrain, hallelujah. Because of the self-imposed trap, Cohen spent entire weeks agonizing over single syllables. He needed the internal cadence of every line to sit perfectly within a slow, rolling tempo. The obsession grew so intense that it became physically and mentally destructive. At the lowest point of the Royalton sessions, Cohen was found by friends sitting on the floor of his room in his underwear, frozen by writer's block and knocking his head against the floorboards in despair. He couldn't figure out where the song wanted to go. Over those 4 to 5 years, Cohen ended up writing as many as 80 different verses. He was caught in an internal war between two completely different identities for the song. On some pages of his journals, he wrote deep, orthodox Old Testament poetry evoking King David, Samson, Delilah, and the Holy Dove. On other pages, he scratched out a gritty, cynical contemporary bedroom breakup letter. He was afraid of the song sounding too corny or too sweet. He kept editing, discarding, and rewriting, unable to find the perfect balance. When he finally walked into Quadrasonic Sound Studios in New York in the summer of 1983, the creation process didn't get any easier. By this point in his life, Cohen's voice had dropped significantly into a heavy, gravelly, tired bass baritone. He was singing at the absolute bottom of his vocal register, which meant he didn't have the melodic range to lift the chorus the way he originally envisioned. To solve this, he and producer John Lissauer manufactured the song's dynamics in the studio. They anchored the track with a prominent pulsing fretless electric bass line and a consumer-grade Casio keyboard drum machine set to a slow 6/8 waltz groove. Then, they layered a massive wall of soaring, gospel-style backing vocals behind Cohen's rough lead to carry the actual melody. When Cohen finally handed the finished album over to Columbia Records, he walked straight into a brick wall. The builder of that wall was the label's president, Walter Yetinoff, and Yetinoff absolutely hated the record. Columbia had already paid to fund the entire production, but when Yetinoff listened to the tapes, he didn't hear a masterpiece or even a viable commercial release. He was openly dismissive, condescending, and notoriously looked Cohen in the eye and said, "Leonard, we know you're great, but we don't know if you're any good." When Cohen pushed him for specific feedback, Yetinoff claimed he just didn't like the way the album was mixed. Cohen tried to compromise, offering to go back to the studio and completely remix the tracks, or even let the label bring in their own engineer to do it, but Yetinoff flatly refused. To him, the music felt small. It completely lacked the epic, massive production standards he was chasing for Columbia at the time, and he simply couldn't see the potential. Instead of trying to work with Cohen, Yetinoff blocked the album's release entirely in the United States. It was released in 1984 in Canada and Europe, and then eventually picked up later by the independent label Passport Records. The album was finally included into his catalog in 1990 when Columbia released the Cohen discography on compact disc. A remastered CD was issued in 1995. Cohen's poetic writing and his view that many different hallelujahs exist is reflected in the myriad covers with various different intents and tones, allowing the song to be melancholic, fragile, or uplifting, sometimes even joyous, depending on the performer. John Cale, the first person to record a cover of this song in 1991, promoted a message of soberness and sincerity in contrast to Cohen's dispassionate tone. Inspired by John Cale, Jeff Buckley recorded one of the most acclaimed versions of Hallelujah for his only complete album, Grace, in 1994. It was released as a single in 2007, 10 years after Buckley's death. In 2004, Buckley's version was ranked number 259 on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Songs of All Time list. That same year, Time magazine called Buckley's version exquisitely sung, stating that Cohen murmured the original like a dirge, but Buckley treated the song like a tiny capsule of humanity, using his voice to careen between glory and sadness, beauty and pain. It's one of the great songs. Canadian-American musician and singer Rufus Wainwright recorded a cover using piano and had a similar arrangement to Cale's version. Wainwright's version is recorded on the soundtrack album for Shrek, although it's Cale's version that was used in the film itself. The Shrek soundtrack containing Wainwright's cover was certified 2 times platinum in the United States in 2003, selling more than 2 million copies. From a music perspective, there's been a lot said about the secret chord. It's right there in the first verse. Now I've heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord. But you don't really care for music, do you? It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor falls, and the major lifts. The baffled king composing hallelujah. All right, so let's break this down. He mentions a bunch of numbers and fourths and fifths and minor falls, so let's figure out what that means. Traditionally, the song is in the key of C. Every scale can be broken down into a series of numbers. So in the key of C, you have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and you finish on C. So you can refer to those notes as numbers as well. So C would be 1, D would be 2, E would be 3, F would be 4, G is 5, A is 6, B is 7, and you go back to 1 or 8 on the C. Using numbers is really handy, especially when you're talking about harmonies. Because if you need to change the key of a song for a singer, for example, it's much easier to say to somebody, oh, the song is 1, 4, 5. So let me break that down. So every major scale is broken down the following way. You have 1, which is a major chord, 2 is a minor chord, 3 is a minor chord, 4 is a major chord, 5 is a major chord, 6 is a minor chord, and 7 is a diminished chord. And you go back to 1 again. So the chords in this song start off alternating between 1 and 6, or C major and A minor. And it alternates this until the verse starts. Now I've heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord. Now it moves to a 4-5-1, which would be F, G, and then C. And it goes back down to G just for emphasis. And then now we get the part that gets interesting. It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor falls, the major lifts, the baffled king composing hallelujah. Okay, I really shouldn't have picked the original key to try this one in. But anyway, you get the idea. So what you have here is the description of the chords as they go through. So he says it goes like this: the fourth, the fifth. The fourth is F. The fifth is G. And then the minor fall, that's A minor, or the sixth. And then the major lift is back down to the 4, which is a major key. And then here's where it starts to get interesting. It goes back to the 5 chord. And now we end up with a strange mystery chord that goes to A minor. So what is this chord here? That's not a normal chord in the key of C. What I'm playing here is an E major chord. And in the key of C, it's usually E minor, which would be this. Now, not only am I playing an E major chord, I'm playing it in the first inversion, which means I have the third in the bass, the G sharp. Normally I'd be playing an E chord like this. That's root position. But he's playing it like this. And the main reason is that good voice leading in the bass, because what you have is you have a G chord with the G in the bass, and then you just move the bass note up a half step. And sometimes I hear it played with the dominant, with the D, so the E dominant 7, which has that in there, which Just adds a little bit more color, and then it resolves to. So that's it, right? That E major chord, that's got to be the secret chord, right? Well, who knows? It might just be a cool chord, and the lyrics have nothing to do with the chord progression. But since we're talking about King David from the Bible was often depicted with a kinnor, or an ancient Hebrew lyre, or harp. And those lyres were actually always diatonic, meaning that E major chord wouldn't be possible. So if he had a harp tuned to C, and he wanted to play some chords, he could definitely play the fourth, and he could play the fifth, he could do the minor fall, and the major lift. And he can go back to that 5 chord, and then when he wanted to get to this, he wouldn't be able to do it. The best he'd be able to do is go from 5 to this, or 5 to this. So maybe that's the secret chord. I've heard some arguments that may be the secret chord because not only is it non-diatonic, but the lyrics there, he says the word composing. So perhaps, just maybe, that's a secret chord. If it's not, it's definitely an interesting chord. All the rest of the song is using diatonic harmony, and because of its religious overtones, occasionally you do get what they call a plagal cadence. I figure I'll talk about that for a minute. And the plagal cadence is different than a normal dominant cadence. Very often when you're in the key of C, and you hear, especially in classical music, you'll hear things, you'll be in a 1, and you play a 4, and then you go to 5, and then back to 1. And here, what's interesting is the harmony is somewhat ambiguous at the beginning because it's basically C to A minor. To my ear, this song is rooted in C, and everyone says it's in C, but because I'm just going to C and A minor, it's really hard to know what key you're in. You could argue either way. But my point is when I get to the hallelujahs, it goes to the 4 chord, and very often you do 1. But what's cool about the harmony here is that the first time he sings the hallelujah, it goes to the F chord, and then it goes to A minor. And then it goes back to F major. And then it goes to C. That's your amen or plagal cadence. But then he brings you back down to the 5 chord and up to G. So the question is there actually a secret chord or just a wonderful song? So anyway, I encourage you to check out Leonard Cohen's original version. Obviously, Jeff Buckley's is amazing, Rufus's is amazing, Pentatonics have a really cool version, so does Katie Lang. But I encourage you to go check out the original. You may never have heard it before. And it's something pretty special.
Backwards Beats Podcast is a Tunawood production recorded live at Thought Shack Studios in Halethorpe, Maryland.
If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You can find us at Backwards Beats Podcast on most platforms.
Share the love, and we'll see you next week for another deep dive into the next album on Rolling Stone Magazine's Top 500 list. Until then, salt your melons.